Hello again. In the last video we created the project, we created our test level, and we set up our testing framework to run with multiple clients. In this video we're going to actually build our first base pickup class and start dealing with some of the networking aspects in Unreal in C++. So let's go ahead and get started. You'll notice in the editor here I went ahead and rebuilt lighting already, so that's already taken care of in between videos. So let's go ahead and start making our base pickup class. We can go to add new C++ class. You can also right click and say new class. We'll just go here. Now I'm not going to point out every difference between Epic's version of this tutorial and the multiplayer one that I'm creating here, but I will say that there are substantial differences. I'm not going to try and do everything that they do or teach everything that they teach, because they do a really good job and I recommend you check that out. But I will say there are multiple points where we're going to diverge significantly, and this is one of those cases. They're able to derive directly from, as a parent class, they use actor for the base pickup. In our case, if we do that, we run into issues where physics will not work over the network. So that means the pickup would not bounce around and do the things we need it to do. So in our case, for that to work, we're going to derive from static mesh actor. That is not an actor that's listed in the common one, so we got to click the show all classes box, and we'll go in here and just search for it. Static mesh actor, and click next. We're going to call this one pickup, as this is our base. We'll derive the battery from this later. So we're going to create the base class to work with. And now the editor will go ahead and create the class. It'll recompile the code for hot reload, and then it's going to switch over and open the Visual Studio for us. So switch, that is right here. And you'll notice another difference is there's a lot of boilerplate code that you get when you derive from actor, but when we derive from static mesh actor, we don't get a lot of that boilerplate code. So we have a very basic class definition here. You'll see in the header file and in the the CPP file, there's nothing, just the basics. So we don't need a whole lot. What we do need, though, is a place to set our defaults, and we will do that in the constructor. So this is going to be where we set default values when the object is created, and we can just switch over to our CPP file, and that's where we'll actually define it. Now what we need to do in here is make a couple of changes. So first of all, this is a replicated actor, so we need to tell the engine to replicate it. So that's where we set b replicates equals true. So this is going to tell the engine to replicate this actor. And then the other thing we need to do is, let me just switch over to my other code. We have to fix a couple of other things. One thing that we know is true, which is also true in the other tutorial, is these pickups do not need to tick. So we can set the primary actor tick dot b can ever tick to false, because pickups do not need to tick every frame. That would be totally unnecessary and a waste of cycles. So we're not going to do that. And the last thing that we're going to have to deal with, we'll deal with later, which is setting an overlap setting. You'll notice that we're not going to create a static mesh component, which is something that's done in the other tutorial. That is because it's a static mesh actor, which already has a static mesh component, so we don't actually have to create that. So we're actually done with the very basics of creating this class, and we can move on to the next part, which is actually adding the functionality to the class for determining whether or not it's active. And this is also done in the other tutorial. And so what we're going to do is just flip back over to our header and start adding that functionality. Now if we want, we can also compile this code right now. We can just right click on the game itself and click build, and that will compile the code, or you can switch over to the editor and build. Either way. So what we need to do here is we need to know if the pickup is active or not. And so this is a flag. We'll use this as just a Boolean flag that either this class or any derived class can use. So we'll make this protected, and this, we're going to call this is a bool B is active. Okay, and this basically is true when the pickup can be used, false when the pickup is deactivated. Okay, and so that's the information about it. And in our case, we need to make sure that this value gets replicated because clients need to know if it's active or not as well. So this is a U property, and the flag that we use is replicated. Now, another thing we can do is we can actually have this set up so that it actually generates a function call that happens whenever this is replicated, the onRep function. When you create a replicated variable in Blueprint, you get that onRep functionality automatically. You don't get that in C++. So as we've defined it here, just using the replicated, all it's going to do is be replicated, but we won't get an actual function call fired when the variable is updated. If we want that, we would call this replicated using, and then we would put the onRep underscore and then a function name, which is typically the same as the variable, but we might drop the B, so like IsActive. And we would define this function, a function called onRep B is active, or onRep is active function, and then that would be what gets called. But in this case, we don't really need all of that. We can leave it if we wanted to, but we don't really need it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it just so you have that, but we're not going to use it. So I will leave it though. And what we're going to do then is going to need to define that function. So this is going to be something that it could be called in a derived class as well. So we'll set it up in the base class for that purpose down the road. So let's go ahead and call, this is going to be a virtual void, and like I said, it's called onRep. We could call it just IsActive. I can type occasionally. This is a U function. We don't need to put any other things about it. And this is called whenever B is active is updated. And this would basically be so that clients could do localized things like maybe change the state of the object from a graphical standpoint, maybe play an effect or something like that. Again, this is something that's covered in pretty good detail in Epic's tutorial, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but this would be the function that would get called. And so since we've set this up, we're not going to make it an empty virtual function because we need it to be called, but it doesn't have to be defined by by derived classes. So we'll go ahead and implement it as well. And that's just going to be an empty implementation. We're not going to actually do anything, but we do want to implement it. So we'll create that here. And this is onRep is active. And we're not going to do anything here. So maybe we have a to-do, or maybe we don't do anything, so we'll just leave this empty. Okay, so that's all defined. So now we have the functionality that will get fired off whenever this thing is called, but we also need to be able to access this variable outside of the class, outside the class hierarchy. So we need to go and actually define the functions to do that. And so that's going to be just a setter and a getter, or an accessor. So let's create that. So the first we need to be able to ask is active. We need to be able to ask the class if this is active. And this is going to be a U function. We might need to use this in Blueprint. So we'll make this Blueprint pure, and we'll put it in the category of pickup. Again, Epic's tutorial does a really good job of going over all these things, talking about the difference between Blueprint pure and Blueprint callable. So I'm not trying to rehash that material, but Blueprint pure just means it's going to be called every time, so we'll get the value of the flag. Blueprint callable means that it will get called whenever the input pin is fired, and then the output is stored in the output pin and is just sort of cached there until you fire the input pin again. So we need to set this as IsActive. That's just Blueprint pure, and then we need to actually set this. So there's going to be a set active, and we'll have to pass in a variable. So this is the new pickup state. Okay, and this is also a U function. And this one, like I said, is Blueprint callable. And it will also be in the category pickup. Good grief, can't type. Not at all, actually, apparently today. Okay, so this is, just put a couple of comments so we know what we're talking about later. So this allows other classes to safely change the pickup's activation state, and the accessor lets us returns whether or not the pickup is active. Okay, so we've got those declared. Now we can switch over to the CPP file and define them. So these are pretty straightforward, as you can imagine. We're just going to return the bool for this is active, and all that's going to do is return the B is active flag, and then we have the set. So a pickup set active, and we pass in the bool for the new pickup state, and this is going to be one where we're going to diverge a little bit because we have to be careful about this. Who should be able to change the activation state? Should anybody who calls this function, whether it's a client or the server, be able to change the status or the state of the pickup? No. Here we want to make sure we put in an authority guard. That's what they call in an Epic's tutorial for the blueprint. I'll just use the same terminology. So in C++ land, we will say if your role is equal to role authority. If role is equal to role authority, that means you are the authority. That generally means you're the server. So it's the same check that you see them do in Blueprint. We're doing that here in C++. So we check if role is role authority. If that's true, then you can go ahead and set the state to the new pickup state. Okay, so this is our authority guard, and this is one of the places where we're going to see this start to diverge, where we're going to add things like this authority checks on these where we're changing state. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is, of course, we need to set a value at the at the beginning of time. Whenever this pickup is spawned into the world, what's the default value going to be? Well, again, we want this thing to be active by default, and there's no reason to change to be inactive. So we'll set that, but we'll make sure that only the server can do that. So we'll back in the constructor, we'll put the same authority guard on that. So if somehow a pickup is just spawned on the client, the default value of a bool, unless you set it, is going to be false. So that means it'll be deactivated or inactive by default. So in our case, though, here we're going to be able to set it to true by default, but only if this is on the server. So that is pretty much all we need to do with that. And now what we can do is probably cause ourselves some problems. And how we're going to do that is we've gotten all of our code written. So we wrote the functions, we've defined the variable, we've set up our onRep function call, so we can go ahead and compile, right? Surely this should work. All of our code is pretty much correct and everything looks right, so we shouldn't have any problems. But in fact, we get a whole bunch of errors. Now, why are we getting these errors? Well, because now what we're doing is we could try and parcel this out, but I'll just tell you that the problem is we're getting this unresolved external, and the issue is because we have not defined get lifetime replicated props. Because now we're actually replicating variables and doing network things, so we need to set up some network scaffolding. We need to implement some C++ code scaffolding for networking to work correctly. So that's what we're going to do next. So what we have to do is go in and define this function, which is called get lifetime replicated props. So we'll just throw that under the constructor here. This is a void function, get lifetime replicated props. And this is something you can research further, in the code base, because you have access to all of Unreal Engine 4's code, so you can dive into this and search this out on your own time. But basically, this is going to be where we define all of our replicated values and things. So lifetime property. So it's an array of these structs called out lifetime props, and this is a const override. Okay, and this is just required network scaffolding. Okay, so this is just setup that's required for our networking to function. Now, of course, since we've declared it, we have to go and define it. So let's flip back over here to our pickup class, and we will set that up right over here. And I'm just going to copy paste that part of the line, so I don't have to type it again. And here, we first, with like a lot of things in Unreal, we want to call the super version so that they have an opportunity to do whatever the base class or the parent class needs to do. So we'll pass the out lifetime replicated props. And then here's where we do the interesting part, which is we have to tell the engine what we're replicating, the variables and things like that. So it's a macro called do rep lifetime, and there are other parameters you could pass in here, other types of macros you can declare here, but all we need to do is say, hey, for the entire life of this class, of an instance of this class, you're going to replicate this variable. And so we put in the class name, and then the variable that we're talking about, which is the IsActive variable. Okay, and that's it. But what's wrong? Right now, the do rep lifetime isn't resolving. We're still seeing the squiggly lines, and IntelliSense isn't helping us out. So the problem is, because now that we're doing networking things, we also need to include that in our includes. So we need to add that to our list, and this is network code. So net Unreal network.h. So we have to include that in our code here. And now you'll see that once this is all updated and IntelliSense is done, then this is no longer messed up for us. Now we should be able to go in and right-click and click Build. There is one other thing that we'll need to change later on. We could change it earlier or later, and that is in the base class for the game, which is the NMP game class. Right now it's engine minimal. We'll eventually need to change this to engine. You can change it now, or we can talk about it later when we actually change it. So I'll just leave it for now, but suffice to say that later we are going to have to change this to just engine. But excuse me, for now we'll leave it. Okay, so now we've gotten our class defined, our pickup class, and our base functionality for IsActive, and it's all networked and replicating. So we can flip back over into the editor, but of course there won't be anything interesting happening yet. We'll get to doing some more of that in the next video. So I'll see you then.